Now, let's go to the first person who I'm exposing as a person who is part of the rebellion in the Matrix or outside the Matrix. Somebody who's trying to keep your eyes open. Somebody who's trying to enlighten you. I've been listening to this guy for probably about 5 years, 6 years now. And although he's somewhat controversial, I think that unlike Ben Shapiro, he is an intellect, even though he doesn't carry himself as one. But he's a guy who's similar to me in terms. He wants people to be, he likes the golden rule. He's a golden rule guy. I'm a golden rule guy. Do unto others, right? But also he is very curious and wants to understand truth, facts, regardless of where they land. And his name is Joe Rogan. He has a very popular podcast. He has taken some flack from the left for some reason. Well, I know why. Because he's had on some controversial guests and given them a platform. And once you do that, unfortunately, the emotionality from the left is fairly aggressive. And it started labeling him as an alt-right, which he couldn't be further from an alt-right. Although he has moved a little further right over the last couple of years, and become a little more political, which I don't like. I have to admit, he is still a person who cares about facts over fiction, information over affirmation, and propaganda. So I'm going to show a couple clips, again, illustrating a guy who cares about fact versus somebody who carries themselves as an intellect, and making that intellect person who's actually a propagandist look stupid. So watch this first clip.
Then there's the question as to whether the institutions today are racist. And that's not quite the same thing, right? Because history has consequences is not the same thing as saying the rules today are racist. Because the rules today are not racist, actually. The rules today are quite not racist. But
historically, it's fairly recent. If you go from the civil rights movement to 2020, we're really not talking about that much time. We're talking
3
about
generations.
50 plus years.
60 years, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
50 plus.
Right,
in the world of, in
the vast span of human history, it's not
a very small amount of time.
Right.
So clearly there's some impact of both racism
Absolutely.
and then Jim Crow laws.
So in this clip, Joe Rogan finally gets the intellect to admit that what we see in America is remnants of our history of white supremacy and slavery. Okay? When you are a propagandist and you don't care about fact, you make yourself look stupid. I'm going to show you another video with the same two players. One guy who's making an effort to enlighten us versus another guy who is a propagandist. Oh, Ben Shapiro. Watch this clip.
The problems that have plagued communities in the United States, not just the black community in the United States, but problems of racism or problems of sexism, the way those get alleviated is people making better choices over time. Right? That is the problem. That's the way that those issues get alleviated. When Jews arrived in the United States in the early 20th century, to talk of my people, when they came, they were impoverished. They didn't speak the language. They were banned from country clubs. There was open discrimination against them. They were banned from Harvard. Right? Harvard Law School had quotas on Jews. The way to fight against that is to make good decisions. And so you fight against the system to make sure that the system has rules that apply equally to everyone.
Right, but you clearly see that there's a big difference between people coming over here willingly and doing so in order to better their lives versus someone whose ancestors were dragged over here to be sold as property, and then dealing with the repercussions of that being your family history. And red line laws and all the other things that were put in place to sort of keep them in very specific areas, which to this day remain crime-ridden, gang-ridden, deeply impoverished communities.
Well, that's true, but the question is how much of that is historic redlining and how much of that is an 18-year-old kid today deciding to pick up a gun and shoot somebody?
But how much of that 18-year-old kid today deciding to pick up a gun and shoot somebody is based on him growing up in this fucked up environment where that's what he models, where everything around him is crime and gangs, and you imitate your atmosphere, which is what all humans do.
Right, but the answer is there's only one way to break that chain.
What way is that?
That way is to not pick up a gun and shoot somebody.
I think
meaning
that's
that
a simplistic way of looking at it if you're on the outside of that community.
So in this clip, Ben Shapiro tries to argue that the plight of the Jews is the same as the plight of the Africans of slave descent in this country, which is absurd. Absurd. Anybody who cares about information and fact and is an intellect would be able to see that clearly. Apparently, Ben Shapiro cannot, and also gets exposed again as being an imbecile in this particular clip. I'm going to show you one more clip that exposes him a little further.
Community, and you're not one of those 18-year-old kids that grows up with the incredible influence of all the people around him, and that's all you see, and that's all you know.
Well, but the problem is the only way that's going to be the thing that your kid doesn't know is for you not to do it. At some point, personal agency has to come in.
It does,
because
but education, and teaching them about personal agency and letting them understand that there's a way out of this, and that the path that they see being replicated over and over again by these people that wind up dying young, that wind up going to jail, that there are other options. There's a lot of kids that never get that other information, or if they get it, they get little blips of it, but the vast majority of the information, the vast majority of the influence they get is terrible.
Well, I totally agree with this, and this is why I think the worst thing that you can say to a kid is you're born behind the 8 ball, and no matter what you do, you're not going to succeed.
Yes,
right? That's literally the worst thing you can say to a kid. What you should be saying is, look at how your grandfather was born behind the 8 ball, and look how hard he had to work in order to get ahead. And look at all the opportunities.
That's true, though. But if your grandfather wasn't ahead, didn't get ahead, if your grandfather was in and out of jail, if your father was in and out of jail, if everyone around you is like that, if there's literally no influence that's positive in your life, the idea of saying to a kid like that, hey, don't pick up a gun and shoot somebody, that's way too simplistic a version of their future, in my
Well, I mean,
my
the problem is I don't see an alternative solution. Right?
I
When
think
you're talking about solutions.
I think an alternative solution is there has to be some sort of large-scale intervention in these communities to do something about what has already been set in motion and the momentum that keeps continuing decade after decade.
So in this clip, Ben Shapiro says, well, you get exposed to how your grandfather pulled himself up from the bootstraps, so to speak, right? That's a common right-wing talking point. But it's clear that a much higher percentage of Africans of slave descent in this country don't have stories of where the grandfather pulled himself up from the bootstraps, because guess what? There were physical barriers, emotional barriers, psychological barriers in place to prevent him from doing that. Therefore, again, this clown gets exposed as an idiot versus an intellect. So, people, okay, just the main focus I want you to get from this particular video is care about what goes into your brain. If you care about actually accurate information, it takes effort these days to get quality information. You can't just go on YouTube, or you can't just open up a newspaper and expect to get untainted, propagandized information anymore. You have to find it. If the source of information that you're getting if the source that you're getting your information from tells you what you want to hear every single time you open it or you look at it, guess what? You're in the Matrix, man. You're eating the steak that Cypher told you about.
After 9 years, you know what I realized? Ignorance is bliss.
Once again, hit the like and or subscribe button if you like this content. The next episode will be probably a 3 or 4 part series, because it's going to tackle race in this country, some real talk. So I hope you're ready for it. Thank you.